Welcome to this week's episode of Coffee with a Journalist, brought to you by One Pitch. The guests on our show include some of the most notable journalists from the top US-based publications who cover topics including technology, lifestyle and culture, health, science, consumer products, business news, and beauty and wellness. We discuss their role, the types of stories they cover, what their inbox looks like, and how they connect with sources. Head to onepitch.co and look for the video page to learn more about our new video series featuring guests from the show. Today, we're joined by Alex Levine, a tech reporter for Politico. Alex covers the intersection of technology, government, and public policy, and she is the author of Politico's daily newsletter, Morning Tech. When not on the tech beat, Alex can be found doing improv, training for her next marathon, and ghostwriting wedding toasts under the pseudonym The Toastess. During the episode, Alex tells us about the wild array of pitches she receives, a lesson she learned from her professor in journalism school, her side career as a speechwriter, and more. Let's hear from Alex now.
Welcome, everyone. This is Coffee with a Journalist. I'm Beck Bamberger. I have an agency called BAM that works with all venture-backed technology companies. And I also started One Pitch, which is a platform helping publicists get better pitches to our wonderful journalist friends. And that is the point of this show, to bring on journalists to tell us what they love about pitches or hate about pitches. We'll kind of take everything, their favorite stories to tell, stories they consume, all this good stuff. We try to have a good time. And with us today is Alex Levine. She's a tech reporter at Politico. I'm excited to have you here, Alex. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Are you drinking coffee by chance?
I had my large fill of coffee a little earlier this morning. I'm now on to water.
You're good to go. All right. We're fueled up. I'm drinking coffee here in my lovely glass mug. So half of us have coffee here. This is good. Alex, could you tell us, actually, I've been starting this with a couple people more frequently on this podcast, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Tell us about the coverage of Politico. What would you say Politico covers?
Politico's coverage, Politico's bread and butter, is really policy and politics. So we differentiate ourselves by really gearing our coverage toward DC insiders and people who are interested in going deeper in various policy areas, from technology, which is what I cover, to healthcare, to education, to transportation, to agriculture and climate, to energy, to many other issues that are front and center in Congress and in Washington, D.C. more broadly.
In addition, there's also additions. So there's a Canadian one, there's Canada, or there's California. So if you want to get further into a certain state or locale, you can get into there as well, which I always find helpful.
Absolutely. We've got satellite newsrooms in many state capitals, and then also across the Atlantic in Brussels. And I believe we've got some reporters in London as well.
Mm-hmm. Helpful. Alex, as the tech reporter, how is your inbox?
It's such a good question, Beck, because I was just having a conversation with one of my colleagues recently about how it's become incredibly difficult to actually get stuff in my inbox that is even relevant to my beat. I mean, I want to say I get probably just north of 100 emails a day. And if I take a few days off, or I take a week off for a vacation, I'll come back and it's probably closer to 1,000. But I was just commenting to one of my colleagues the other day about how, for whatever reason, I want to say in the past 6 months or year, my inbox has become less and less relevant to me. And the pitches, for whatever reason, have become less and less relevant to technology more generally. So this morning alone, for example, I got pitches on restaurants, on wildlife policy, on music festivals, on the dangers of gas exposure. Those are just a few. And so what happens is a combination of, either I find that I'm deleting so many emails before I even open them, or the pitches that are actually really useful to my beat and to our coverage, I find they're actually just harder to get to and easier to miss because of the deluge of other material that's just not fully relevant.
What then do? You mass delete, you file, what do you do?
So I am definitely somebody who needs to have my inbox clean. And I know others, like with their text messages, they'll have 100 text messages or 1,328 unread emails, maybe 14,300 emails. I cannot allow that to happen for my own sanity and organization. And so for me, I typically will mass delete emails just based on subject lines that I see as not relevant. So if I see wildlife policy in the first 3 words of an email pitch, I delete that. I care greatly about wildlife policy, but it's not relevant to my beat. And so I find that, mass deleting is one thing. And then sometimes what I'll do is when I actually do find the, pitch that is more relevant to my beat, even if it's not something I'm covering immediately, if it's something more generally that's in my space, I will log the contact info or log sort of the theme of the pitch into an Excel sheet it's not external. It's just like the little thing that I use to keep track of my own stuff. I'll jot it down in there. And I think a lot of times that I'll return to that later.
Now, wait a second. You have like a Excel sheet, Microsoft Excel sheet, like not even a Google sheet, like one on your desktop?
Yeah. So
oh my gosh, I've never heard this before.
I keep an Excel sheet. It's pretty embarrassing, actually. It's really low tech. It's got a lot of colored headers and such. And the way that I think of it is sort of when you've got a really messy bedroom where your stuff is all over the floor, but because it's all over the floor, you know exactly where everything is. And only you can know how to find everything. That's sort of the look of the Excel sheet that I've got going. So I have, tabs for comms people and PR people. Then I have another tab for experts on a given subject or people that might be particularly helpful for a specific story. Many of these people are sources that I've built up over the years, but many of these people are also just contacts that I've never actually spoken to, but that I think would be potentially great people to speak to for a future story. And so, especially when I'm in a breaking news situation where, I need to have somebody on hand quickly to weigh in on something, I find that, of course, going back to who I've spoken to before is extremely helpful. But if it happens to be on a topic that I have not covered in depth so much, then having these names on hand can be really valuable.
I love this Excel sheet. This is so novel and old school, but hey, it's working for you. Usually I've heard more people do they have filings. Some people I should say, have attempted to do coding and filing and then others have just used a very basic, like I just search my inbox. That's it. Forget the filing, forget the organization. It's just a landmine of just all my sources in there somewhere that I just search for. And I'm like, well, efficient. I do that too.
I find that I really am a creature of habit. And I like to joke that as a tech reporter, as far as tech reporters go, I'm probably one of the more low tech reporters as far as the way that I stay organized. I love writing things down on paper. I love using my Excel sheet, which is just extremely analog. And, there's nothing high tech about it whatsoever. There's no codes, there's no formulas, there's no, equal signs and asterisks and stuff like you've got in other Excel models. It's very, very 101, but it really helps me stay on top of things.
Wow. Okay. So within that Excel sheet, let's just play this out. When have you used it to execute a story? Just to give people an idea.
I've used it to execute a story when I'm looking for a very specific source to speak to. So, one of the issues that I cover a lot, for example, is facial recognition technology. Yep. And I was pursuing a scoop late last week that I really was intent on pushing out before the weekend hit on facial recognition. And when you hit, I've always been told this about reaching out to either editors to pitch editors. I've also been told this about reaching out to sources to comment on a story. And I feel that it's probably like a helpful thing as well from the PR side of things. One of my professors in journalism school once told me, never reach out to anybody before noon on a Monday and after noon on a Friday. And I think that in the 24-hour news cycle, you have to assume that many people are certainly going to be responding to emails before noon on a Monday or afternoon on a Friday. But I think to maximize responsiveness, it really is a good rule of thumb that I've tried to stick to. So late last Friday, though, I was pursuing a story and I knew that, getting anybody to comment on something late on a Friday afternoon when it was already dark outside on the East Coast was not going to be easy. And so I sort of went through my Excel sheet and I looked for all of the people who I either have spoken to on facial recognition or people who I've been meaning to reach out to on facial recognition. And I really pinged, a good at least half dozen people.
Okay. And what was the response?
I got what I needed. And it wasn't, I should say, I don't think that that's the best strategy always. Like I don't believe in, mass emailing people just to get a soundbite. I really don't believe in that. But I think that because of the timing of it and because it was time sensitive and it was a scoop and I wanted to make sure that it got out sooner than later, my best bet was to just really try like half a dozen people at the same time.
There you go. Okay. So that worked. I love it. When you are thinking about a story to do, so as for example, I'm seeing quite a few of your stories about social media algorithms or the souring on Facebook, of course, although that is a continuing story. Twitter CEO leaving, that happens to be breaking news. But maybe a more long form, more not breaking news type of story. Where do you get the inspiration for those?
Usually I get the inspiration from those in passing conversations with people about something else. One of my rules of thumb is like, if you want to know what's going on in a certain space that you're interested in, speak to people who are in that space at a time that is not breaking news. So one thing, for example, that I've been looking at recently is CFIUS. CFIUS is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. And this is this government body that reviews foreign investments in U.S. businesses. So for example, TikTok, one of the social media platforms that I cover closely, was recently, during the Trump administration, was under CFIUS investigation. And there's been a lot of questions about what CFIUS is doing around TikTok and other social media apps under the current administration. CFIUS is very difficult. It's a very difficult nut to crack. And it's the sort of thing that often gets written about only when there's breaking news on it. And this fall, Politico, myself, and a couple of our other reporters embarked on this effort to begin reporting on CFIUS at a time when we were not in a breaking news situation. And we started reaching out to all of these people. Many of them are some of the top people who are quoted on CFIUS during breaking news scenarios. But we were able to have, hour plus long conversations with these people about the way that CFIUS works. What we heard was that they believed that a lot of the coverage about CFIUS wasn't great because it got a lot of things wrong, and not specific to Politico coverage, but coverage about this committee generally, they said, was just not great because a lot of times it gets written about in breaking news scenarios when people don't really have time to dig into all of the details. And as a result, they said people get a lot of stuff wrong. So we ended up speaking, I must have had hours of conversations with so many different people who are current and former, officials. And those conversations led to so many story ideas about this committee that is so undercovered unless there's breaking news that there's no way we would have ever been able to come up with that stuff if we had only, tapped it during a breaking news scenario. So I really believe like speaking to people who are living and breathing this stuff every day during a time when you're not in an emergency fire drill situation is the best way to find story ideas. And a lot of times people will say things that they think is not all that interesting to them because, like I said, they live and breathe it every day.
Yeah.
But you hear one nugget and you're like, that is fascinating. I'm pretty sure other people don't know that. I've certainly never heard that. Chances are, if I as a reporter find it to be interesting or it's something that I haven't heard, the odds are that our readership would find it interesting and that they probably haven't heard it either unless they're, shoulder deep or super well versed in this stuff. So, I'm also really interested in intersection of tech and healthcare is another big thing that I cover. And speaking to doctors, I've got a family of doctors, so I find that a lot of our family meals, especially Thanksgiving, is really just me interrogating all of my family members with medicine.
Hey, there you go, though.
What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are the challenges you're facing? What is technology doing to make everything in your practice better? What is it doing to make your experience at the hospital worse? All these sorts of things, just asking people who, may not be like even the top expert on such and such topic, getting ideas from people who are living and breathing stuff every day is really how I find my stories.
That is such a good point about when people are so deep in the trench of their own industry, their own thing, they don't recognize or perhaps know how compelling or enthralling or even interesting what they're upon is to other people, not in the thick of things. And so, that's so good point. And I bet you find all types of gems just digging around and asking people more.
I think the hard thing from a pitch perspective is you want to pitch things when they're relevant, right? You don't want to necessarily pitch things when people aren't paying attention to them. But at the same time, there is something to be said for sometimes surfacing things when, it doesn't feel like everything is exploding or you're stepping on a minefield. Maybe people will have more time to look more closely at something at that point. So I think if you lined up 10 journalists and asked them, better to pitch me when it's really topical and relevant, or better to pitch me when it's very quiet and I've got, a lot less on my plate, I think you'll probably get 10 different answers.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I do think it's sort of like a counterintuitive thing to think about.
I wonder well, here's perhaps a question not normally asked on here, but how would one even know how consumed you are with the news cycle versus not? Now, it might seem obvious. Oh, if this person covers technology and Twitter's CEO just bounced or Facebook is in Congress, okay, probably a bad time. But are there any other ways or clues? Is there like, Tuesday afternoon is my best time? I don't know.
I don't think that there's an obvious way. I think the most obvious is what you just mentioned, right? So for example, after I jump off this podcast with you, I'm going to spend the entire afternoon and evening covering the Instagram head testifying before Congress. And it's the first time he's ever testified before Congress. And all of this was prompted by the Facebook whistleblower turning over documents about Instagram and how much it has known about some harms that it's caused to teens and young users. So this is a really big deal. Anybody pitching something during that time, I think it might easily get buried, but I would also hope that if you're looking to pitch a tech story, that having just general awareness about this is a very, very big deal in the tech world. So maybe I'll just wait till tomorrow morning, I think is an important awareness to have. But the other thing is, I don't think that there is really there's not a way to crack the code of this is when a person's busy, this is when a person's not. But I do really feel strongly, and I know that not everybody agrees with this, I feel strongly about, I think journalists try to set boundaries, especially, tech journalists who always have to be on their technology. I really try to set boundaries with, when I'm pinging people, the hours that I'm working. And I may always be online and I may be working late into the night, but I'm not going to ping unless I'm really, really in a bind, I'm not going to be pinging people at 11 p.m. their time or texting them at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I've gotten pitches texted to me.
Texted? Really?
Yeah, people have texted me pitches Saturday night, even at 9:30 p.m. or sometimes on a weeknight when I'm, in bed and I'm just powering down for the night. And I find it to be, not everyone agrees. Some people are like, you got to be on all the time. And I think that you can be on all the time, but I find that we try to be respectful of boundaries. And so sometimes when I get outreach at that hour, I'm like, I can't respond to this. And I don't want to respond to this.
Yeah, it encourages the behavior.
The long-winded response to your question is just, I don't think that there's a way to know exactly when people are busy or not. I think having a general awareness of what's going on the beat is one important barometer for that. But other than that, it's just kind of being human about when you're reaching out.
I'm shocked. Who's sending a pitch 9 p.m. on Saturday?
Not going to throw them under the bus, but it's happened definitely more than once.
I just want people to know that there's ways to schedule emails. Just
Absolutely.
Consider that, everybody. Okay. PSA right there.
Today's interview will continue after this brief message brought to you by OnePitch. Are you curious to see the unique ways OnePitch helps PR professionals and marketers pitch journalists? Head to onepitch.co to learn about our new OnePitch score and see how easy it is to find the right journalist to pitch your news to. Sign up for your free account today. Now, back to today's episode.
All right, Alex, I have some fill in the blanks here for you. So I'll give you the phrase and you could fill in the blank. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. My favorite sources always.
Reference something I've written.
Yes.
But actually show that they've read it.
Oh, important. How often do you get something that's like, oh, I saw you wrote about plants last week. Here's a pitch on vegetables.
At least once a day.
It's just playing to you without clearly the work to read a few sentences. Yeah. Well, the most annoying sources always try to fake you out with reading your articles.
Pitch me things that are fully irrelevant to my beat or that I have not covered.
You'll get a response from me if
you keep the pitch short and sweet.
How short?
The most helpful pitches are no more than a paragraph or two. And they usually tell me succinctly why this is topical and why it would be a helpful voice to include.
You'll never get a response from me if
you threaten that if I don't respond fast enough, you'll take it to a rival outlet.
What? That's pretty.
That has happened. That has happened.
Oh.
And that has happened. And it's not nice, but also I think that there's just a tendency, especially in the culture of just firing emails back and forth, to like forget that there's a human on the other end of this.
Yeah.
Everyone's working really hard on both ends. Everyone is working extremely hard. And to get an email when you're covering a congressional hearing and somebody says, if you don't respond to this, I'm going to give it to insert outlet here, which is it's sort of like, you know, sticking a knife in and twisting it a little bit.
Yeah. No need for that. No need for that. You can follow up with me if
it's very time sensitive and you've only already emailed once or twice.
Once or twice. So 3 is the max for you?
I think it depends. Yeah. I think it's helpful because people are so inundated with emails, but I also believe that that not everybody who says that they are, oh, I missed your email, it got buried. I think that a lot of people are actually more organized about their inboxes than they let on. And so to say that, I think I do.
Hell yeah. Yes, they are. Yes.
Well, I think it's helpful to bump emails, but I think sometimes it's just that people, you know, it's not relevant or people don't want to respond.
I had someone yesterday on here who is so good, apparently, with her emails. I'm not going to say who, because I want people to listen to all the shows, that she's like, I never need to follow up. No, I never need to follow up. No, I got your email. Wow. And I just didn't respond. Yeah. I love that. Okay. It would be a huge help if sources
could send me current or former employees of the companies that I cover.
Elaborate.
Could help connect me to current or former employees of the companies that I cover.
Former or current. Okay. That's needed. The best compliment I received about my work was?
That was a really fair story. Fair, not as in mediocre, but fair as in maybe tough, but fair.
Tough but fair. I like it. My favorite stories to write are?
Features and profiles.
Yes. One thing I think people should know more about me is?
I used to want to be a comedy writer, and I'm a speechwriter.
Yes, the Toastess.
Yes, I am a speechwriter when I'm not on deadline.
Mm-hmm. How did you get into that, by the way?
I started the Toastess. I am the Toastess, and I write under the pseudonym the Toastess. But and by the way, nothing political about anything that I'm doing speechwriting for.
Yes, for weddings.
Yes, I actually started my career as a weddings writer. I was writing and fact-checking stories for the wedding section of the New York Times. And from there, I ended up just being the go-to person in my friend group and my extended family. Anytime anybody needed help editing anything or writing anything or stringing together words for a toast, I was always the person. And living in New York City where the rent was really high when I was in my mid-20s, I thought this would be a really great business idea. And I think people always think that speechwriting is only something that politicians can have. Mm-hmm. And they think that, you know, you have to be a public figure or you got to be a corporate CEO or some really big, important person in order to have a speechwriter. But I think that because everything now lives on social media, and there's so much pressure, and people get so anxious and worked up about, you know, making speeches at personal events, and there's so much emphasis placed on them that somebody can kind of interview you and then take your words that you might not find to be that interesting and make them compelling. It's really an art. And so I do sort of the same thing with my speech writing that I do with my stories, which is I interview people. They may think it's not super interesting. I hear a nugget and I jump on it and I spin it into a narrative. It's really, really fun for me.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You have great testimonials on there too. Okay. Back to this. My perfect Sunday is
having coffee while listening to classical music, going for a run, coming back, and napping.
Oh, a good deep nap. Nothing like it on the weekend. My favorite hobby is
Writing. I know that might be lame coming from a journalist, but writing, and more specifically creative writing.
the last song I listened to was
Drops of Jupiter by Train on the run I went on before recording this podcast.
there you go. Quarantine has taught me.
To stop planning ahead so far out.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I feel like to just be more present in the moment, to not be able to plan, and to realize, especially when you're planning a wedding, which I'm trying to do,
Oh,
that
God.
you can't.
Wait.
Yeah, that you can't plan too far out.
Wait. Oh my gosh. Are you at all having this meta moment where people have asked you, the toastess, to write speeches for your wedding? Wouldn't that be something? I'm sure that hasn't happened, but how funny if it did.
Yeah, well, I think one article that I want to write that definitively does not have a politics or policy hook is how somebody who writes other people's vows writes their own vows, which I'm very much struggling to do. So I'm beginning the process now. I've got like 9 months, but it really is difficult to do when it's for yourself. So that's why I understand what my clients, what their needs are so badly, because I really can't do it myself for myself.
I wonder, could you apply the same process to yourself, or like give it to someone else, the process of you're like the client or something?
We'll see. I'll keep you posted.
Okay. Alex, what are you reading, listening to? You mentioned the music just a second ago. Consuming, watching, we'll take any stories. What you got?
I have found that since I have started on the tech beat, especially because for my first couple of years on the tech beat, I was a newsletter writer. I was like so deep in tech news only.
Yeah.
And everybody has their quota, and there's only so much time in the day, and everything I was reading was tech news.
Yeah.
And
that's hard.
Ever since I moved off of the newsletter about a year ago, I have really tried to actually decrease the amount of tech news that I'm reading, because I'm already so deeply plugged into it. Okay. And I think I've tried to really increase my reading on other areas that I sort of dropped the ball on. And I think that that's really important, because so many tech touches everything now. And I think that actually to be able to like better contextualize the stuff I'm writing about, in the context of what's going on nationally and globally, it's so important to not only have a lens on what's going on in my world. I also really love, as I mentioned, features and profiles. And there's so many tech writers out there. I would say, there's people who have written for Vanity Fair, for The Hive, I adore. I've even read tech profiles in Vogue and The New Yorker and glossy magazines that, online, more narrative, nonfiction focused publications that don't necessarily have a huge tech team the way that Politico or some of the other, major newspapers might, but that do tech coverage, and they highlight the same people that we're covering in a completely, just highlight them in a different way. And I think that understanding the people that we're writing about as like really the protagonists in the stories that we're doing, I think is incredibly valuable. And it's not, reading or writing a profile of some of the people that we cover might not necessarily be a Politico story. It might, a 3,000 word like opus on somebody's life might not be a Politico story necessarily. But I find that in the coverage I was reading previously of, incremental developments in Congress and incremental developments in federal agencies in the White House, I find that I was sort of missing coverage of who these people are, what their backstories are, how they got where they are, what makes them tick, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Nothing like a long, in-depth narrative. Did you read Greenlight's Matthew McConaughey?
I did not.
Oh, I think you'd enjoy that, because it's just so, and I'm not particularly a fan of his. I know him, as the actor. Okay, great. And he seems really nice, but there were so many reviews on, I think it was Audible. Like, I'm going to pull it up right now because I have to double check. That it was so, I was like, what the hell? What's going on here? It was so much. I'm like, wait, I just got to listen to it. Yes, 113,679 5-star reviews.
Wow.
I'm like, what is, the book's incredible. I think you'd like that as a memoir. So that's my add to you. Rarely am I suggesting things on here. I'm usually typing down stuff, but I think you'd like that one.
Thanks.
If you can listen to it too, all the better, because he narrates, and it's always great when you get a good voice and with the actual author. That is magic. Well, transitioning totally not about anything of Matthew McConaughey. What do you think the future of journalism looks like?
That's such a huge question. And
I know.
One is very philosophical and that I can nerd out on all day long. I think that what we're seeing is just there's so much fragmenting, right? And there's so much movement of journalists into their own little newsletters and into their Substacks and journalists breaking off from news organizations and creating their own news organizations, which even a few years ago was just extremely unusual. And now it's becoming increasingly common. I think that one thing that I've noticed is just journalists really becoming part of their stories more. And I think that that can be a really good thing, but I also think that that can be a not so great thing. I think that Twitter and social media have made some journalists into superstars and made them really into part of the story or put more of an opinionated spin on coverage that never previously would have been opinionated. And I think that different newsrooms have different policies towards this. I think that they're not in many newsrooms, and I've been in multiple newsrooms, and these policies are not, necessarily evenly enforced, but a lot of times the loudest voices on social media become the journalists with the largest followings. And then that in turn allows outlets to reach more readers. And I just think that that model and that system it's just ever changing and kind of problematic. And so my hope is that sort of the pendulum swings back to the middle where, I don't know, as much as I'm covering social media, sometimes I wish that social media were a little bit less of there's going to be something else. We talk about the metaverse coming, like there's going to be all these unforeseen emerging technologies that will continue transforming the way that our industry operates. But I feel kind of hopeful, and I don't know if this is sort of pie in the sky and impossible to take steps backwards now that we're already, using social media as such an integral part of coverage and getting it out to the world. But I do hope that there is, some point where the pendulum swings back to the middle and social media and screaming on Twitter and all of that becomes a little bit less of the coverage process. I think that especially if we're talking about turning down, everything is very politicized and polarized. And I think that it's a lot easier to attack journalists and to vilify journalists when their opinions are all out in the open. And everyone is going to have opinions behind closed doors. I think it's important to have perspectives on things. And everybody at the end of the day is human. So of course, people are going to have strong feelings. But I just think that in the moment that we're in, it's so important to kind of reel that in and to get back to the kind of like the nuts and bolts of the journalism. And I do think that social media has really detracted from that.
Yeah. I wonder if to the pendulum swing, can it come back to being civil or just not as involved or something? I don't know. And I also then I'm always looking and thinking of like a global construct and going like, is it like this in the Ukraine, in South Africa, in many other places? And I've been all over the place, but I'm like, and definitely not in places where there's no freedom of any sort to have any discussion about any criticism of anything. But is this just an American thing? I wonder about this. Because we're just so like loud and boisterous. And I have a thought. I mean, every American has a thought about something. You know what I mean? I wonder about that.
And to be sure, I'm not accusing journalists of being uncivil.
Oh, I'm not either. Just people in general, specifically Americans.
Any industry that you in, you're going to find people who are, the big talkers and who like to run their mouth off and like to kind of like ruffle their own feathers. But I do think in journalism, there used to be a sense for like keeping the journalists behind the scenes and letting the others do the talking. And I do feel I'm on every social media and it's been a great tool for me for work. But I do believe that the pendulum has like swung a little too far in the direction of people using it, I think like using it sort of in a way that I think sometimes undermines the reporting that we're all doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will see how this continues. What a time. What a time to be in this field. I'll say that. All right. Well, Alex, transitioning once again here. Now we have just hopefully fun, hopefully silly, sometimes very accurate Mad Lib that we love to play here at the end here. So I have some certain words and you could give me your word back to fill it in. And then I'll read over the whole paragraph if that sounds good to you.
Sounds great.
Okay. First, an emotion.
Excitement.
Excitement. An adjective.
Grizzly.
Grizzly. Another adjective.
Outrageous.
Oh, this is getting great already. A greeting.
Hey there.
Hey there. A verb.
Thwarted.
Thwarted. A noun.
Artificial intelligence.
Okay. An adjective.
Flawed.
Flawed. Haven't heard that one in quite some time. A cringeworthy PR term or phrase.
Ooh. First of its kind.
First of its kind. And a part of a pitch.
A part of a pitch?
Yes. Like media kit.
The peg. The news peg.
The news peg. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. In other words, how is it tied to the news and relevant? Then a length of time.
24 hours.
The name of a real person, ideally alive.
Mark Zuckerberg.
And then a emotion.
Anxiety.
There you go. Okay, here we go, Alex.
Hear it.
When I think of the future of journalism, I feel excitement. The pitches I receive have gone from grisly to outrageous. If I receive a pitch that starts with, hey there, I get thwarted. When I write stories on AI, I get slawed. My favorite pitches include first of its kind and the news peg. I normally take around 24 hours to respond to my emails, but if it's Mark Zuckerberg, I will respond immediately. If you do get a response back from me, you should know I'm very anxious for you. There you go.
That is so funny. And the Mark Zuckerberg piece, definitely spot on. Some of the other stuff about how I want my responses to make people feel anxious, definitely not spot on. That was really fun though.
Thank you, Alex, for being on here today. This was really fun. Alex Levine from Politico, tech reporter. Pitch her correctly, please, everybody. And if it's Mark Zuckerberg, she'll get right back to you real quick.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Coffee with the Journalist featuring Alex Levine from Politico. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you have a moment, please leave us a review to share your thoughts about the show and today's guest. To learn more about the latest tools on OnePitch and to subscribe to our weekly podcast newsletter, head to our website at onepitch.co. We'll see you all next week with a brand new guest and even more insights about the journalists you want to learn more about. Until then, start great stories.